we're going to look at the cost of shipping. It has doubled in just 1 month as rebel Houthi forces continue to attack ships in the Red Sea. That, according to London-based Drury Shipping Consultants. For example, the average cost of shipping a 40-foot container from China to Los Angeles rose about 40% in the week ending last Thursday. Major shippers have averted container ships around the Cape of Good Hope, adding more than a week to transit time. The IMF is saying maritime traffic through the Suez Canal is down 37% so far this year compared to the same time last year. CGTN's Adel Amouki has more from there.
The Houthi is an armed rebel group that has for decades engaged in wars for power in Yemen. With their dominant Shiite beliefs, they have been backed by Iran against the Sunni-led Yemeni government supported by Saudi Arabia. In the 1990s, they were famous for organizing rallies that would chant, quote, "Death to America, death to Israel." After the war in Gaza broke out in October, the Houthis, with an arsenal of weapons that's only grown in recent years, declared support for Palestinians and joined their war on Israel. After a series of drone and missile attacks on Israel, the Houthis said back in mid-November that they would begin targeting shipping vessels owned or operated by Israeli companies in the Red Sea. In response to those attacks, shipping companies started diverting their vessels away from the Red Sea and its Suez Canal, the shortest path between Asia and Europe, opting instead to navigate the much longer route all the way around Africa and its Cape of Good Hope. The U.S. created an international coalition to secure navigation in the Red Sea. On January 11th, that coalition began bombing Houthi locations in Yemen. Following the strikes, more ships are now avoiding navigation through the Bab el-Mandab Strait, the main access point into the Red Sea from the south. The Suez Canal authorities said that the number of ships crossing during the first 10 days of January dropped by 30% and its revenues shrunk by 40% compared to the same period last year. As the crisis stretches on, a serious interruption to global supply chains is expected. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And as mentioned, the Red Sea crisis is being driven by the fighting between Israel and Hamas. John Gambrell has that story.
There has been dramatic scenes in the Israeli Knesset, that's the parliament here in this country, as families of those hostages still held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip stormed into a finance committee meeting today. Some held signs, some yelled, "Save our children." Others demanded to know why the lawmakers were seated there, not doing more to help their loved ones. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that he does not want a ceasefire and does not want to pull out Israeli troops out of the Gaza Strip as this war is going on. That's apparently what Hamas has asked him to do in order to free these some 100 hostages that remain in Gaza. You'll remember that over 250 were seized back on October 7th when Hamas launched that initial attack on Israel that sparked this entire war. But as of right now, there doesn't seem to be any movement on getting those hostages out, even as there's increasing pressure on Netanyahu to accept a two-state solution for the Palestinians to end this conflict. Meanwhile, we have seen new claims about the ongoing Houthi attacks in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden that's disrupted global shipping. I spoke with Vice Admiral Brad Cooper, who's the head of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, which oversees the Middle East here. He said that there's definitely signs that Iran is helping the Houthis with these attacks. He stopped short of saying that the Iranians are giving any sort of targeting guidance to the Houthis, but he said that they were training them, equipping them, and offering guidance on these attacks. And, you know, these attacks have been going on since November. We have seen the U.S. launch 7 rounds of airstrikes on Yemen in the meantime, targeting air bases, targeting suspected missile launch sites. Now, tonight we did hear from the military spokesman for the Houthis. He claimed that the Houthis had launched a new attack on a U.S. flagged vessel in the Gulf of Aden. However, the U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet came out very strongly after that, saying that those claims were patently false. But irregardless of what's going on right now, it remains incredibly dangerous in this vital waterway, crucial for the world economy. I'm John Gambrell with the Associated Press for CGTN in Jerusalem.
Okay, clearly a lot at stake here, humanitarian-wise as well as economic. To talk more about the Red Sea situation and how it is affecting global trade, we're joined by Alan Baers. He's the president of logistics and transport firm OL USA. Robert, thank you very much for joining. Alan, thank you very much for joining us. We certainly appreciate it. I want to get right into it and look at the importance of the Red Sea in global trade. Let's look at how we got where we are right now, and the danger that a host of shipping channels in the region could be shut down.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. Fire away with whatever questions you have.
Okay, well, let's just, that's what I guess I'm trying to get at. What are the concerns? Where do we stand right now in terms of trade? And it's not just the Red Sea. There are a host of shipping channels in that region that could be adversely affected. We've already seen prices in just a month go up 40% for some container ships. What are we looking at?
Well, overall, with the loss of the Suez, looking at it from a U.S. perspective first, we've lost a lot of capacity to come from India, Southeast Asia, also from China proper into the United States East Coast. That's the most impacted area, then followed by the U.S. Gulf. As you indicated, rates are escalating month over month. If you look early in the fourth quarter, we're probably up 200 to 300% now on prices that we had back in October to what we're looking at right now during the month of January, especially the second half leading up to Chinese New Year. The forecast of that at the moment is that this interruption of service could continue anywhere from 6 months to a year. No one really knows. I think the biggest issue now is that we need to have reliability. The carriers who operate, who are now, as you point out, going by the Cape of Good Hope, we need for them to just set up a service pattern that importers and exporters can rely on,
right,
and then organize their supply chains around that.
Okay, Alan, it's interesting you talk about trying to figure out where we're going to go, and you point out that really no one does know. We just know that the costs are going up. But apparently it's not figured into all the cost for consumer items so far. If you look at the United States, for example, the market hit 2 new records, S&P as well as the Dow today. When do you think consumers are really going to start feeling the pinch of this?
Well, it's hard to say. It depends on what you're shipping and how much. So when you think of a container, a 40-foot container, it depends how much you're loading. So if you're loading flat pack garments, T-shirts, for example, you're going to get thousands in there. If you're loading large pieces of furniture, you're only going to get maybe 20 or 30, for example, sofas. There, the increase is far more dramatic on that segment of the business versus someone who's shipping garments, for example. And so when you get it down to per piece, I don't know that right away people are going to increase their price. But I would think if this goes on much longer than March, coming out of Chinese New Year, importers in particular will try to edge that into their consumer price at that point.
You know, we've heard a great deal about the supply chain crisis, really, since COVID began some years ago. Obviously, what does the Red Sea, how does this equation figure into it? And you also talked about China. It is pushing for some kind of joint effort to resolve the issue, but it's also right before the very important New Year holiday, and they're trying to get as much out as they can ahead of this holiday.
Yeah, I mean, the geopolitical side of this is interesting just from a student, I should say, of history and everything else that goes with it. We're not in a position as a business really to comment on that, but I think there are pressures on both sides. As you point out, the Chinese economy and that of all the Southeast Asian economies are interested in steady, ample supply of vessels because they want to move their product into where consumers are buying. The Europeans in particular are directly impacted because most of their trade in and out of Europe goes through the Suez, and now they have the trip around the Cape of Good Hope, as you point out. That can add 2 to 3 weeks for them. U.S. East Coast consumers and importers will feel it more than U.S. West Coast per se. But everybody on a global basis is going to feel part of this as prices edge up.
You talk about everybody on a global basis. That's really somewhat sobering. How do you think this disruption could compare with what we saw during the pandemic? Because I remember seeing all those ships off the coast of California waiting to come in, all kinds of effects, and that really hit consumers in a huge way.
Well, yeah, I don't think we're going to, it's exactly the same parallel. This is one of longer transits and possibly the need for more ships to go on the longer transit routes. when we had COVID, we were running out of physical labor in a sense that we had so much cargo, not enough longshoremen to unload the ships, not enough warehouse workers, truckers, even railroad capacity. So all of those things combined to put the U.S. supply chain into a bit of chaos. Here, it's more cost because of longer transits, but once you organize your supply chain around a steady supply of ships arriving, let's say every Friday in the port of New York,
Right.
you more or less can adjust to that, albeit at a higher price.
So we know that the trade vessels are going to do what they can to avoid these hostile areas, but I've had people ask me, how is this going to impact cruises and tourism? It may be an unfair question for you, but if you can shed any light on it, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I read a couple articles over the weekend that a few of the cruise lines who normally would have gone through have canceled trips. So I saw one, I don't remember exactly the names, but I saw that 3 or 4, not that I want to put them in a bad light. So they were canceling some of the cruises that would have gone through the Red Sea, and it doesn't work for their schedule to go around Cape of Good Hope. So it's too long on a cruise. When you have a 7 to 10 day cruise, maybe from the Mediterranean that you were going to go through the Red Sea, turn around and go back, you can't do that now safely. So they're canceling some of those vessels and schedules.
Yeah, I can imagine a cruise ship going around the Cape of Good Hope too would also certain rough weather now and then. But Alan Baers, thank you for joining us as always. We certainly appreciate it, and let's hope this gets resolved sooner than later. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.